Hey, welcome to episode 5 of my Zelda tutorial series. Today we'll be making a simple sword that you could use against the Stalfos that we made. When I say simple, I mean there's no swinging animation, it's just a tiny stab with no movement involved. But it will be easily expanded upon in a later video. All the code we write will still be applicable. And yeah, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff with how items will work today. And we're also going to make a simple state machine and make a few changes to our code from the last few episodes. So the first thing we're going to do is make a new scene, and the root node is going to be a node 2D called sword. Let's just save that in a new folder called items, and there's also going to be a PNG file for the sword sprite that I'm gonna have in the description. So next we're going to have an animation player that I like to call anim, then a sprite, and we'll set the texture to the one I just told you about, and set the H frames to 2. And now we're going to add an area 2D, call it area, then have a collision shape 2D, set the shape to rectangle, and then the extents are 2 and 6. So yeah, that's what it'll look like. I'm just gonna lock all of these in place real quick. Now we gotta make all the animations. Like I said, today's episode, the sword's gonna be pretty simplistic and simple stab, no movement. We're just going to set the rotation for the sword and how far it'll stick out from the player for each animation. So let's start with an animation called swing up. Let's go to the sword, its transform. The position is going to be X and -10, so it'll stick out 10 pixels above the player. Create a new key, set the rotation degrees to 0, and then just for up, because it's going to be from the camera, it's going to be the sword's going to be behind the player, we're going to set the Z index to -1, and yeah, and we're just going to copy that for swing down, except the position is going to be 0 and 10, so it's 10 pixels down. The rotation is going to be 180, so flipped, and then the Z index is going to be 1, so it's going to be right in front of the player. And we're not going to touch the Z index anymore, it's just going to be like that for the rest. Now we have swing right. The position is going to be +10, and 3, I want it to be just a little below the player, and so it lines up with the hands. So that, the rotation is 90, that, and then the Z index is good, and then swing left. Same deal, but -10, still 3, rotation degree will be 270, that, and that's that. Now I just want the speed to be a little bit faster, 4. So the length of the animation will be 0.25 seconds. You could change that to whatever. If you really want to, you can move the sprite, move the collision shape, do whatever you want. You could create actual swinging animation as long as you move the area on top of it accordingly, and it'll still work with what we're going to make. Okay, save that. Now let's create a new script in the items folder called swordgd, and okay, keep the ready. We're going to have a variable type that is null. Now, in our entities, type is a constant, and the default is enemy, so all enemies will have the enemy type. And if you remember, this is so that things of different types will be able to deal damage to each other. And it's going to work the same for here, except it's going to be a variable, because for the sword, it could change. The way I'm setting up items is, instead of having certain amounts of projectiles that enemies use and then all of the player's items, for the most part, any enemy, if set up correctly in their code, could use any item that's set up for the player. So the type's going to be set in the ready function in a second, but we're also going to have a damage constant, set it to 1. And then we're going to have a variable called max amount and set that to 1. So what max amount is, it's going to be in every single item, and that dictates how many of that item can exist for that entity, like how many of that item that entity can create that could be active at once. For example, I could set the max amount to 3 with arrows to prevent just spamming arrows. You could press it however fast you want, but there will only ever be 3 on the screen. In the sword's case, it's only 1. So now in the ready function, type is going to be whatever the parent's type is, and then we're going to connect a signal animation finished to ourselves to a function called destroy. Let's just make that real quick. So what this is going to do is, as soon as the animation is finished, and we have to pass an argument to that, because animation finished has to tell the function which animation has finished. But once that animation is finished, we're just going to have it queue free, so delete itself. And let's just play that animation. So it's the same deal as the animation switcher, where it starts with swing, so that's the animation it's trying to play, but it's going to be the parent's sprite direction. So this, we're going to come back to this later, but this is all you really need for a functioning item. You just need this, and then some way to tell it to delete itself eventually, so that a new item could be spawned later, and changing its type to the correct type. Later on, we can make a scene that will extend from, like we did with the entity, but we're just making a little thing right now, so this is good. Now we just have to we have to be able to use it. We have to create the use item function. So function use item, this is in the entity GD script, and new function called use item with an argument called item. Inside that, we're going to have a new variable called new item, and this is going to be an instance of that item. So the argument we're passing is going to be a direct path to the scene of the item we want. And eventually we'll have a list of all the items paths that we could just easily get from. But for now, we're just going to use the path. Then we're going to add this item to a group whose name is comprised of the name of that new item and the entity's name. So it'll be not the entity's name, but the entity's like ID number. So this would look like sword, kinematic body, 1010 or something like that. It's just going to have a running list of how many nodes of that type that entity has. And then just add the child. And then, yeah. So now what we have to do is check how many get nodes in group, how many of that item exists for that thing. So we're just going to type the same thing, new item, get name, and self. So it's going to check that group of that item with the entity and get the size of it. And if that is more than the new item's max amount, so it's going to check in the sword, okay, what's the max amount? 1? Okay. Or is there more than one sword out? If there is, it's just going to take that new item and delete it. So we are one step away from being able to use a sword. We just have to create a new button mapping and add that to the player code. So let's just go to project settings and input map. We're going to create an action called A and B. You can set these to whatever I want. I do X for A and Z for B. This matches the Game Boy order buttons, whatever. And I'm going to go to the player script. And we're just going to stick this in our physics process. If input is action just pressed A, so if we just used the sword button, we're going to use that new function, use item. We're going to preload the sword scene. And that's that. So let's run and hope everything works. And nope. Okay. Get nodes. I can't spell. Get nodes in group. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. So yeah, just if you were copying down what I was saying, get nodes in group in the use item function. And now we can walk around. A sword comes out, but we can use it while we're moving, and it doesn't interact with the enemies at all. So let's go change that. We want the player to stop when it uses the sword for like the duration of the sword animation. And the way we're going to do that is a state machine. So a state machine separates different code into different states, so certain things can only happen when the entity is in that state. Our current player's physics process is all what we are going to make the default state. So what we're just going to do, so we're going to cut all of that and make a new function called state default and paste it back in there. And then we're going to have another function called state swing. And all this is going to do is switch the animation to idle, and what else does it do? Oh, and activates damage loop. So all these little things, controls loop, damage loop, and entity, all that stuff that we have here running all the time, will not, only damage loop will run in state swing. And we're going to change this around a little bit. This is just a quick little thing. So the player will only be able to take damage. That's it. He'll stand still. It won't be looking for its controls. It won't be trying to move. It won't be trying to find the sprite direction. None of this. So how we're going to switch is going to be a new variable called states, and it's going to be set to default, and we're going to have a match statement for our states. So match state, the first case is going to be default. So if state equals default, then run the state default function, and then if state equals swing, then state swing. So now all we have to do is make the states actually change. So change the state somewhere in the code. So how we're going to do this is with the sword down here, we're going to check if the parent has a method called state swing, then change that parent's state to swing. Now, if an enemy doesn't have like a complex state machine with multiple stuff, it'll just swing the sword and it won't stop. Or maybe we could set up a state for that and have it do something else other than just stopping. Maybe it'll move faster or lunge towards the player or something. It doesn't matter. Just all the sword wants it to do is, if it could swing the sword, just swing the sword. And then I'm going to do the same kind of thing. Same line. If has method state swing. So if it has a swinging state, once the sword is destroyed, it is going to set it back to default. So we don't get locked in the swing state and not be able to move. And then hopefully we run this and it should work, but we should take little pauses when we're walking. Yep. And since it just uses the idle, there's no swing animation. It's just that, but I'm holding down left and just pressing my A button or X, and swings the sword. So now we have to do one quick little change to our damage loop in our entity script. So we had it like this, for body and get overlapping bodies. This will only check between, in the entity's case, kinematic bodies and kinematic bodies. The sword is a node 2D, but it does have an area. So instead of having this, we're going to check for areas in hitbox get overlapping areas, and then we're going to keep the rest of it the same, but make body equal area get parent. So in entity's case, it'll be the hitbox's parent, which is the entity, and in item's case, it'll be the area's parent, which is the item, or the sword. And that should work just fine. The rest was, we made it pretty standard. And if we go up to an enemy and swing the sword, it's going the wrong direction. Did I do something wrong between project files? 1 second, I'm going to pause the video. Sorry about that. It has to be global transform.origin minus body global transform.origin, because the sword is the child of the player or whatever's using it. So its transform is going to be relative to that. Global transform is like its transform relative to, I believe, the center of the root scene. I'm not. It's a more absolute location. Now, if we run it, and hit him, yeah, okay, it knocks him back, and yeah, that's all I'm going to cover in this video. Now, as you can probably tell, actual product at the end of the video is kind of lame. The sword isn't very interesting, and there's next to no feedback when it hits the Stalfos. It doesn't take that much knockback. There's no effects, but a lot of it was accomplished in the back end. There's gonna be a proper video on the sword eventually. It's just it would have made this video much longer than it is, and I want to have one whole video to spruce it up a little bit. But the next video is going to focus on making enemies actually feel nice. It's going to have hit animations, better knockback code, or slightly changed knockback code, and death animations. So we're going to have like health and stuff. Excuse me. Yeah, that's all I'm going to cover. If you'd like to talk about any of my videos or ask me any questions, I created a new Discord channel that I've been putting into the descriptions of my videos. If not, you can still reach me in the comments. I'll reply as soon as I can. I've also put together a Patreon page, but I'm still changing around the rewards, so I'll have a different announcement when I'm more happy with it. But check it out if you're interested. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon. And yeah, goodbye.